In this video, we're going to look at 15 garden trellises from the MakerPipe community. These are all made out of off-the-shelf EMT conduit and fittings from MakerPipe.com. If you don't know what those two materials are, you can combine them to create all kinds of cool stuff. You don't have to do any welding. You just use simple hand tools to cut conduit and to build with the connectors. And people use it for all kinds of stuff. And gardening is definitely one of the most used things that people build projects for. And in this video, we're going to focus on trellises that people have built over the last few years, and they've shared in our community. And there's a lot of great ones and a lot of good ideas, and we're just going to highlight and go through them quickly to give you some different, ideas and inspiration for your own gardens this year. This first one comes from Matthew, and this is a massive structure that he built over top of. Looks like he's got 8 garden beds here, as we can see, and he's got a pretty massive area for gardening. Got a ton of room here, and he built this structure that's made to sit over top of all of them. So sometimes we see people build trellises, and we'll see later in this video, trellises that are, specifically around one bed or a couple of beds, but this is kind of built to be over top all of them, and they're all connected together, which is a good way of doing it. And we'll kind of highlight a couple of things here. So like I said, this is EMT conduit. This is specifically 3/4 inch trade size, but we can see he's using, a lot of the basic connectors, like the 45-degree connector, got a couple of the 4-way connectors here, just to kind of build this big rectangular cube, probably some 90-degree connectors in the corners, and those are kind of the standard connectors that you can use to make something like this this big. And you can check out our EMT conduit connector guide down below if you want to figure out which connectors you need for your project and kind of get more of a highlight of each connector, or you can check out the website, of course, and see the pictures and everything. But essentially we've got a few of those standard connectors being used to make this huge structure, and it's over top of all of these garden beds, like I said. And this kind of gives them the freedom to kind of customize and change this throughout the season, which is something that we commonly see, where people will build a structure like this and then they'll add enclosure material to the outside and turn this into a giant enclosure when they've got plants growing up and they've got animals trying to get in there, or they'll turn this into a greenhouse and just add some plastic or some frost protection. Right now we can see that he's got some trellis netting attached to this frame. So if we look here, we can see all throughout the frame, he's got, little strings going down to his plants all over this thing. I mean, they're just attached all over this build, and those are all running down to his plants. So right now it's just kind of in trellis mode, but then you can either take apart this and turn this into something totally different when the season changes, and when your plants change, or you can just keep one big frame and then customize that over the course of the changes that your garden will have. So that's really cool and a really great build from Matthew. Thanks for sharing it. This next idea comes from Jennifer, and this is a really cool lean-to trellis that she put together. We can see here, this is leaning against the side of her house, and she wanted to be able to open the windows, she was saying, and so this is kind of meant to be offset from the wall a little bit. And so the way she accomplished that was just using some 45-degree connectors, which is another connector that we highlighted just a minute ago. But here essentially just creates that little bit of space and that gap in between the wall and the conduit, where essentially you've got this piece of conduit on each side going all the way up from the ground and then attaching to that 45-degree connector, one there and one there. And then we can see just using a few more T connectors, which is a connector I don't know if we've talked about yet, but just joins 2 pieces of conduit together and then just adds these 2 cross supports to create this kind of rectangular trellis that this cattle panel is attached on the outside of, as we can see here. So just secured on the outside, which is really awesome, and just a really great technique for making a lean-to trellis. I don't know if these are staked in the ground down here, if they're just kind of resting, but you could secure these in a couple different ways if you're worried about them falling over. But it's really cool, and then we can look at this photo and we can see where it's got some stuff growing on it, so it's working like it's supposed to, which is really awesome. Thanks so much, Jennifer, for sharing this. Next up is this really awesome mobile trellis that comes from Scott. This is really cool because pretty much just built this EMT conduit and MakerPipe frame down here and then used the frame to kind of hold these cattle panels in place and created this large kind of U-shape trellis frame that he can take these cattle panels out of, and then he can slide these around and change these really easily. But it's a pretty cool idea because, oftentimes we'll see structures that are really tall and really large, and they're made all out of EMT conduit, but this is just kind of a small footprint build, as we can see down here, and then just kind of utilizes the functionality or kind of the shape of this frame to hold in the cattle panels, and then it works as a trellis. There we can see a MakerPipe mini model of the frame, which is really cool, a great tool to use as you're planning your builds. But this is a really awesome idea, and really great for those different things that might change throughout your garden. So really cool, Scott. Thanks so much for sharing it. Next up is an archway trellis that was shared recently, and this one is awesome because it kind of goes between two sets of garden beds. We can see there's a really small metal garden bed here, and then there's a longer one on this side. But essentially, they just use the incremental bending calculator that we have available for making arches, and essentially just created this archway that goes from this garden bed here up and over to this garden bed, and then they got an arch in the back there, and then they're using some of the T-connectors. Actually, no, those are crossover clamps. Nice. So yeah, they're using crossover clamps to keep this one piece of conduit continuous, and just goes from one side of the frame to the other, as we can see there. And then they've got some more down here being used to add these cross supports between the two arches, and I think those are T-connectors being used to hold those in place there. But building arches is a really cool thing. It, not only looks great, but just kind of adds a lot of functionality, especially if you do something like this, because you can arch all the way between two beds, and you can utilize this entire space with this hardware cloth attached to the outside of the frame. You can use this entire thing for trellising real estate, which is really cool, because a lot of times you give up a lot of that space once you just have, a single vertical wall that's a few feet high. So that's really awesome and a really great idea. So thanks so much for sharing that one. Next up is a trellis from Tim, and this one is really cool. This is kind of like a two-tiered tomato trellis, and there's a lot going on in this one. It looks like there is pretty much just a small rectangular frame with some 90-degree connectors down here, just, standard rectangle with 4 verticals in the corners, just like that. Just like that. There you go. Just kind of making that basic rectangle. And then there's another rectangle, an even taller one, that has verticals going all the way to the ground inside of this other rectangle with more of the 90-degree connectors. Sorry, I'm drawing kind of fast on here, so it doesn't look the best, but with 4 more 90-degree connectors to create this rectangular frame up here with these 4 pieces are kind of going between them. So kind of 2 rectangular trellises kind of nesting inside of one another, and then allows for trellising down low and trellising up high, which looks like it's working really great. Looks like it's loaded down with tomatoes, which of course is what we want. So that's really awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, and glad it's working out for you. Next up is this trellis from Derek, and I love it when we have people that have unique spaces and they need a custom trellis and they're able to use EMT conduit and connectors. This is definitely one of those situations, because we can see here they've got this kind of retaining wall that is kind of taller, and then we've got these, I don't even know, decorative blocks up here that have these holes in them, and they're essentially using these to support the trellis. So if you look closely, you can see there's 3 horizontal pieces of conduit coming out from those decorative blocks all the way out here to the edge. And because you can customize the dimensions of an EMT conduit frame really easily, they've just got these 3 different heights of these verticals connected to those those horizontal pieces, and totally custom to match the dimensions and to be even. And then they're just using MakerPipe 90-degree connectors and T connectors in a few different places to kind of add these cross supports between them, as we can see there. But then, as we can see, they've got a bunch of trellis netting secured to the verticals here, the horizontal pieces that are just running down to their trellises below, or to their plants below, and looks really awesome, and is just a really great use of space and a great way to get some trellising in a really unique space that definitely requires something custom that you probably wouldn't be able to buy somewhere else. So that's really cool. Thanks so much for sharing this. We love seeing it. Next up, we have Jenny's walkway trellis, and this is another one that utilizes space in a great way, because this utilizes overhead space over top of this walkway. So essentially, we've got just a few verticals here, just kind of going up on each side. I think there's 4 in total. And then essentially just kind of, instead of doing an arch, this is just, kind of a rigid angle, a 90-degree angle trellis. And essentially we've got the 90-degree connectors being used in a few different places here, just to kind of create this 2-tiered trellis system here on the back. Wow, that vertical is really rough, but 90-degree connectors there, and then pretty much just making this rectangular frame where you've got the 2 pieces of conduit going from the side to side on the front and the back, and then you've got these pieces going from the front to the back on each side as well, just to kind of make this rectangular frame. And then of course there is hardware cloth secured on the outside. That's something that we really commonly see pretty often, which works really well, as we can see in this photo, because it's got plants climbing all the way up and over it, and it just looks really awesome and is working out great. And like I said, it's just a great use of space, because it kind of takes advantage of that overhead space that would probably not be utilized otherwise. So that's really cool. Thanks so much for sharing this with us. Next up is an overhead trellis that comes from Angel. This is really fantastic. Essentially, we've got just a few verticals here kind of supporting this, but then it looks like it goes all the way to the edge of their kind of fence line here, and then it attaches to the fence, and then pretty much just has hardware cloth over top of the frame, kind of running all the way over to their trellis or to their plants and their garden beds. And then we can see here where they've actually got the climbing plants that are on top of there and growing really well, and that's really cool and a great use of space, just kind of taking advantage again of that overhead space, and kind of utilizing the fence for support there, and also adding just some verticals where needed. It looks like with some 90-degree connectors to secure those in place. And I imagine the plants are going to keep growing, and then you're just going to fill up this whole cattle panel, and they're going to have a ton of plants and awesome crops just growing up there up high. So really cool. Thanks so much for sharing this. Awesome idea. Here we have Eric's garden and the trellises that he's built. Looks like he's got a few garden beds. Some are raised in this metal garden bed. Some are actually down on the ground, but he's built trellises for all of them. And essentially, we'll just kind of go through some of these photos here. We can see, here's an awesome idea, kind of getting ahead of myself, but essentially he filled up some scrap pieces of conduit with sand and created anchors for the trellis netting, which is really cool, just to kind of have that extend down to the garden bed, kind of the surface there, and be supported, which I think is a really cool idea that we haven't seen very often, and you could probably utilize that idea for other things as well. But essentially, just created these garden beds, kind of similar shapes that we've seen, just rectangles, going around the whole garden bed. We can also see he's also added some arches to these as well. It looks like these might be secured to the outside of some T-post with some zip ties or something there, because it looks like he's got some T-posts going up and then some conduit verticals directly next to those. We can see these awesome arches, and I think a really great idea whenever you're building arches is to kind of break up, so you're not trying to do one long piece of conduit and then the arch and get all of those dimensions perfect. You can kind of break up and just do the arches and then attach those to your frame, as he's done here with the 180-degree connectors. That works really well to break up long spans and get the dimensions right on any project, but of course with trellises, which is what we're looking at here. But he's done that in a few different areas, and then he's got these awesome trellises going over his garden, and then we can see he's added netting to the outside of the archways, and then he's going to have the plants climbing up there, which is really cool. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but we have an incremental bending calculator, which comes in really handy for this kind of thing, because it makes it really easy to figure out those dimensions and figure out the angles and the measurements and all those different things that you need to know for incremental bending. So I'll link that video down below so you can check that out, but it's a helpful resource and we love seeing people using it. But this is really cool, Eric. Thanks so much for sharing this. You did an awesome job and it looks fantastic. Next up are some garden trellises that were shared by GF, and this is really cool. Again, this is one that kind of sits outside the frame. Sometimes we see people run the conduit through the soil. We see people attach it to the outside, and then we also see people that do freestanding frames, as we can see here. And it looks like that's how it is for all of the garden beds, where you just have these verticals that are kind of sitting and spaced away from the outside edge of the garden bed. So you just have these pieces of conduit going up just like that, and then you've got 90-degree connectors being used in the corners to create this rectangle. You've got these pieces, angled pieces of conduit going up to the peak, with the 135-degree connector, which is a good one to use for these kind of projects. But overall, pretty simple frames. Just kind of has that, just the two connectors on the outside just to make that angled roof peak. I don't know if he plans to add some greenhouse plastic to this, during the winter months, which I guess would be right now, or if he's just only using this for trellising and that's more for aesthetic purposes. But we can see on the outside of the frame that he secured netting on the outside, which will help trellis these plants. And then I think there's some string running down. We can see in there down to the plants as well, to the soil, which will work really well for trellising those, which is good. But here we can see a few more photos of the frame in action. Oh, he's actually got metal cattle panels or hardware cloth on top, and then he's got netting on the outside of the frame just secured with zip ties. But really cool, really great ideas, and I'm sure this is working well for trellising inside the garden. So thanks so much for sharing this. We love seeing it. Next up are some awesome pole bean trellises from Bob, and these are really good. These, again, are a freestanding frame just because he's got garden bed kind of flat on the ground. It doesn't have any raised garden beds, but essentially just got some standard frames here, just with some verticals going up and then 90-degree connectors in the corners to kind of make this three-way corner connection and this cube shape. Got some angled bracing in the corners with the 45s. That's always good to see. We've got more 90s going down, kind of flipped over on their side, just pretty much to make these frames. And, kind of as we've talked about a bunch, just utilizing that overhead space and creating a really versatile and functional trellis in a small area and not taking up too much space while still getting the most out of the area, which is really cool because we can see here he's got plants climbing up the sides with the cattle panels and the hardware cloth there, or no, probably not both. It's probably cattle panels, it looks like. Hardware cloth is usually smaller squares, but you can kind of use either one of those we see often from the community. But essentially, you've got those plants climbing up the side, and then of course the top is open, so plants can climb up there as well. And it looks fantastic. If we go to this other photo, we can see it looks like it's working out great, and the plants are climbing up, which is awesome, and of course what we want to see. So that's really cool. Thanks so much for sharing it. Next up is a really creative trellis that we covered a while back. This one is outside and meant to be a trellis for some container gardens that are going to sit on this patio area. So essentially just use some of the MakerPipe flanges in a really creative way, as we can see here. And we highlighted this a while back, where it's kind of utilizing 3 of the MakerPipe flange pieces to make this L bracket that attaches to these slender columns out here on this patio, and then essentially just securing the pieces of conduit that are extending up and holding the cattle panels. Those are being held in place by those flanges in the back there, and then of course just a short stub coming out of those being secured with a T-connector, and then you've got these really simple kind of like shepherd hook arches going up and then securing to the frame up there with flanges as well. So essentially you just have these frames, you've got 4 verticals, kind of just holding or in place on the column. And that's really the only thing that the cattle panels are attached to, but I'm sure it's doing a great job with that L-shaped kind of flange hack to hold all of this really sturdy. And then you've got these cattle panels secured to the outside, and the container gardens can go underneath, and they'll have plenty of room to grow. So that's a really cool idea and a really creative use of space. Not everybody has a ton of acreage to build a giant garden, so it's always awesome to see people growing their own food in spaces like this, and it's awesome to see them use Conduit and MakerPipe to make that possible. So really cool. Thanks so much for sharing this. Next up is an arbor that was put together by Alan, and this is really cool. We can see here they've got this garden bed out back, and they're growing some gourds on there, and essentially they just also use the flanges to secure some verticals in place, as we can see here if we look closely, where we've just got this vertical going up. We've got, I think there's 5 in total, and then essentially they're using some of the adjustable angle or adjustable 180 degree connectors to add these angled supports to pretty much make this I can't remember off the top of my head, I can't remember what shape this reminds me of, but it kind of looks like it's like a gas station, like a gas station top, where you've got columns in the middle, and then you have the 2 kind of pieces coming off the side, the panels coming off the side, where essentially you've got the angled pieces being supported with that adjustable 180 degree connector, and then you've got the adjustable angle hinge up here to kind of grab onto the vertical, but then you've got these 2 panels that extend off of each side of the angled support, and then you've got the cattle panels on top, which are being held in place and supported by those angles. And if we go here to these photos, we can see that this is working awesome, and they've got plenty of gourds climbing up and actually using these trellises, which is really cool and really awesome to see, of course, and just a really creative design, and it looks like it's working awesome. So thanks so much for sharing this, Alan. Next up is a really simple trellis from SFD, and I love this one because it is simple, but it also has some creativity involved in it. Because if you look closely at these, oftentimes people use the 90 degree connectors, as I've mentioned a bunch, where they make a rectangle kind of cube shape. But here we can see they've got the verticals going up on each side, and they didn't use 90s because they used MakerPipe T connectors here kind of lower to add these cross supports from one side to the other, and then they added these cross supports from one side to the other also with T connectors. And what I think is really cool about using T connectors in this situation is you can totally adjust these up and down. So they can move these braces from front to back pretty much anywhere along these 2 pieces of conduit going up, anywhere they want to. But really, as their plants grow, up here, these 2 horizontal pieces that they have all of this trellis netting attached to going down, as we can see in a bunch of different places, those 2 horizontal bars can also be moved up and down. And so if they want to get them closer to the ground when the plants are just starting and then raise them up as the plants grow, you can totally do that really easily, just a couple turns of a hex wrench, and you could customize that and be really flexible and modular with your frame, which I think is awesome. And just of course, one of the advantages of using conduit and connectors and it's just really cool to see it highlighted in such a simple way here in this build. So thanks so much for sharing it. Awesome job. Last but not least is a really cool idea from Gary, and this is something that we're calling the chain trellis because, spoiler alert, it uses chains to secure the tomahooks in place, which, tomato hooks are something that are really commonly used by gardeners, but there hasn't really been an awesome way to secure those to conduit frames in the past. And so to overcome that, Gary just built this simple frame where essentially just has verticals going up with 90-degree connectors to add these cross supports from one side to the other. And then pretty much just between those pieces of conduit, he's just got chain that's really inexpensive from local hardware stores. That chain's just going back and forth between the pieces of conduit. And then he's got the tomato hooks just kind of grabbed on there and just hooked in place. And then that netting is going down to the ground where he's got his plants growing. So really simple idea, pretty standard frame that we see, just a rectangular cube, but then some chain being used as an inexpensive solution for giving those tomato hooks something to hook into. So that's really cool and an awesome idea from Gary. Thanks to everybody for posting your builds. As always, we love seeing these, and I'll link all these down below so you can check them out in more detail. I'll also link some other gardening resources that should be helpful to you as you prepare to build with Conduit and MakerPipe in your garden in this year. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those down below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.